This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The headlines. President Trump admits there is a substantial chance that his planned summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un will not go ahead. Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg tells European politicians that he will make it a top priority to prevent interference in democratic elections. But some are not.
Some sort of regulation is important and inevitable, and the important thing is to get this right.
Hello, I'm Ben Bland in London, also in the programme. Manchester remembers 1 year after the bombing that killed 22 people at an Ariana Grande concert. A new lava flow from the Kilauea volcano threatens a power plant on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 8 in the evening in Washington, D.C., where President Trump himself was the latest to cast doubt on prospects for a summit between himself and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The meeting is meant to take place here in Singapore on the 12th of June, but Mr. Trump told reporters there is a very substantial chance it won't happen. He made the remarks alongside his South Korean counterpart, Moon Jae-in, who was visiting the White House to try to get plans for the meeting back on track. Barbara Plett-Usher has the details.
This meeting was meant to plan the agenda for the summit, but the focus was more on how to save it. The White House got cold feet after North Korea's dramatic change in tone. President Trump said the unprecedented event could be delayed.
I don't want to waste a lot of time, and I'm sure he doesn't want to waste a lot of time. So there's a very substantial chance that it won't work out, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it won't work out over a period of time, but it may not work out for June 12th. But there's a good chance that we'll have the meeting.
The summit had seemed like a virtual lock. The date, June 12th. The location, Singapore. The agenda, well, that's the tricky part. The U.S. wants North Korea to completely dismantle its nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un had talked vaguely about denuclearization while laying on the charm, until last week, when North Korea lost patience with U.S. demands and threatened to cancel the summit. Mr. Trump suspects that China's president had a hand in this about-face after a recent visit to Beijing by North Korea's leader.
President Xi is a world-class poker player. And I'd probably maybe doing the same thing that he would do. But I will say this, there was a somewhat different attitude after that meeting, so I can't say that I'm happy about it.
President Moon was very happy about the possibility of peace. He hoped his summit with Kim Jong-un would be a template for Mr. Trump's. He wants this to work for South Korea's sake. Officials here now wonder if he's overstated North Korea's willingness to deal. But Kim Jong-un has played along with goodwill gestures, like releasing American hostages. The build-up to the summit has been shaped by an unusual degree of diplomatic showmanship by both leaders. And the Oval Office appeared to be the latest round.
He will be safe, he will be happy, his country will be rich.
Mr. Trump stressed it would be worth it for Kim Jong-un to take the risk, throwing the ball back into his court. The Secretary of State put a positive spin on this sharp reality check.
It is clear we are working to make sure that there's a common understanding about the contents of what will be discussed, but I'm optimistic.
All this coincides with the rollout of a commemorative coin minted by the White House, calling Kim Jong-un the supreme leader, which raised a few eyebrows. A premature sign of confidence, perhaps, with the summit's chances now a toss-up. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, Washington.
Right, let's take a look now at some of the day's other main news. The founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, has apologised to members of the European Parliament for Facebook's role in the spread of fake news and interference in elections. Many parliamentarians, though, were angry that he didn't answer their questions. The BBC's Damien Grammaticus in Brussels has the details.
First of all, they were delighted that Mr. Zuckerberg agreed to come here. Remember, he's not agreed to go to address Parliament in the UK, but they were left extremely frustrated. There were really tetchy exchanges at the end because, partly down to the format, This was an hour and a half. The first hour was the 12 political leaders in the parliament putting questions, but rather than question followed by answer, it was an hour of questions, many questions, and then half an hour when Mr. Zuckerberg replied, and he was able to reply to the specific questions with generality, saying Facebook would do better, it would police fake news, and they didn't feel they got answers to many questions, including about that data breach of 80-odd million users to Cambridge Analytica. Did he know? Did he approve of the decision not to tell anyone about that? No answer. Would Facebook come clean about the taxes it pays in every jurisdiction? No answer about that. What about data privacy? Would Facebook agree to follow all European rules and not collect data, say, about people who don't even log in? No answer. So they were left saying that unless they do get answers, they will push for greater scrutiny of Facebook's competition role, its giant size, and whether that should be looked into.
Damien Grammaticus there reporting for us. Also making the news today, a woman in Britain has been convicted of forced marriage after making her daughter marry an older man in Pakistan. It is the first such conviction in England. The woman tricked her daughter into visiting Pakistan, but when there, she was forced to marry a male relative. More than 1,000 cases of suspected forced marriage are referred to the UK authorities each year. A rare virus spread by fruit bats, which can cause flu-like symptoms and brain damage, has killed 10 people in southern India. At least 9 more are being treated in hospital. There is no vaccine for the Nipah virus. The government has sent a team from the National Centre for Disease Control to investigate. Amnesty International has condemned the militant Rohingya organisation known as ARSA for killing dozens of Hindus during attacks last August. ARSA has denied this, but Amnesty says it confirmed the killings through interviews in the refugee camps. Amnesty also reiterated the need for the Burmese government to be held accountable for its own violent crackdown against the Rohingya people. The former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak, has appeared before an anti-corruption commission. He was summoned to explain a suspicious transfer of more than $10 million into his bank account. Mr. Najib and his wife denied claims they siphoned off billions of dollars from a state fund to pay for their luxury lifestyle. Australian investigators are rejecting claims the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 was deliberately brought down by the pilot. A former Canadian air crash investigator, Larry Vance, had claimed the jet was the subject of a controlled ditching in a new book on the incident. A new lawsuit claims the singer R. Kelly knowingly infected a 19-year-old woman with an incurable sexually transmitted disease. Faith Rogers says she was mentally, physically and verbally abused during her relationship with the R&B singer. R. Kelly is facing a string of sexual misconduct allegations by former girlfriends, which he denies. Now this is part of the commemorations, the moment when people in Manchester came together for a concert in memory of the 22 people killed in a bombing at the city's arena a year ago. Hundreds were injured when a suicide bomber detonated his device during an Ariana Grande pop concert. It was the worst terrorist attack in Britain for more than a decade.
Returning now to our lead story, and the U.S. president saying that a planned summit with North Korea could be delayed if certain conditions aren't met. Earlier I spoke to Jessica Lee, the interim executive director for the Council of Korean Americans in Washington. I started by asking her about whether denuclearization pushed by Donald Trump is an unrealistic expectation.
I think the question of denuclearization is something that needs to be fully explored between the United States and North Korea. And I think people, particularly in Washington, take for granted that this term, which is a very technical term and by nature takes years to implement, is something that North Koreans, have sort of magically agreed to do and pursue. There are certain security guarantees that I think the North Korean regime is looking for before it acquiesces to this, condition. And I think it makes good sense for both countries to talk about what those conditions are rather than talking past each other, which seems to be, unfortunately, what is taking place currently.
Well, it seems the term denuclearization was used loosely and vaguely over the past few weeks. In your view, did South Korea overstate to Donald Trump the North's willingness for a denuclearization deal?
No, I don't think so. I think the term by the South Korean President Moon Jae-in, when he talks about denuclearization of the entire Korean peninsula, it implies that there are going to be certain changes to the security conditions within the peninsula currently. And I think that is going to take really careful strategic discussions about what that means for U.S. troops presence, what it means for the peace of the Korean Peninsula. And I think these are all things that need to be unpacked in a very systematic way. Right now, by putting denuclearization on the table, people don't know what it means. People don't know how long it's going to take. So people are, each of the sides are making assumptions about each other's motives.
Do you think that President Moon Jae-in
can inevitably get into disappointment?
Do you think that President Moon Jae-in can now refocus President Trump, and a summit will eventually take place, if not on June the 12th, after that?
Yes, I'm cautiously optimistic that the summit will take place, if not on June 12th, then sometime thereafter. I think what this current situation has shown is that there's a lot of homework and there's a lot of things to weigh before you walk into that meeting with Kim Jong-un. There are certain things the United States has to be comfortable offering by way of negotiation, and there are things that we should anticipate North Koreans saying, so that there are no surprises. Now, that is a tall order given how difficult the U.S.-North Korea relationship has been for the last 30 years, with things flaring up on a fairly regular basis. So we'll have to wait and see, but I'm optimistic, and I know that many Korean Americans who support President Trump's mission, to bring peace between the two countries, we're also optimistic.
That was Dr. Jessica Lee speaking to Rico a little earlier. The ash keeps falling and the lava is still flowing from the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. It is now 19 days since the eruption began, and geologists say it's one of the biggest volcanic explosions in a century. Overnight on the island, workers rushed to shut down a power plant as lava slipped into the facility. Chris Buckler reports from Hawaii.
The flow of lava keeps moving faster, and the fountains keep getting higher. Kilauea shows no signs of settling as the volcano continues to rip through this land.
You can see how deep in the ground the cracks go, close to where the fissures have opened up. And just take a look here. All of this road completely split apart as a result of the power of the lava. And power lines themselves have actually come down. And behind me, there is just all of this toxic smoke going into the air. At the moment, the wind direction is going in such a way as we're not going to be affected, but we have to have gas masks.
Through that smoke and steam, you can see why so many people here have had to abandon their homes. That's if they're still standing.
Fortunately, my property is okay. I have friends who lost everything. To see their pain is, it's devastating.
Donations of food and supplies arrive on a daily basis from all of Hawaii's surrounding islands, and they know other families may end up here needing help.
We have our boys out there helping to relocate people, and we have guys standing outside ready with their trucks revved up, their trailers ready to go in and out and help everyone, the whole community as a whole.
There is a deep uncertainty here. Kilauea is anything but predictable. Each night when the skies glow red, there is an obvious fear of what will be seen when the colour of the lava dies down and the light of a new day reveals the damage that's been done.
This is the whole reason people come here. Don't run just because...
Islanders know a volcano which normally attracts visitors is now threatening tourism here.
The message that's getting out there nationally and worldwide is that the whole island is inundated with lava. And it's not. In reality, it's just the rift zone, which is on a very small sliver on the corner of the east side of the Big Island.
But in this neighbourhood, they are living in the shadow of lava and having to take risks on the cracked ground that is for now a perilous place to call home. Chris Buckler, BBC News, on the Big Island of Hawaii.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program. Last month, India's Prime Minister said he'd brought electricity to every village in the country, but we visit one of the 32 million households still without power.
Also coming up on the program, so much for the honeymoon. Just 3 days after the wedding, Meghan and Harry get down to the business of being royals.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
Hello, good to have you with us. I'm Ben Bland in London. Our top stories. President Trump says there's a risk that his planned summit with the leader of North Korea won't now go ahead next month.
Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg tells European parliamentarians his company will do more to prevent interference in the democratic process. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and we start off with the New York Times, and it reports on how infighting within President Trump's trade team has smart efforts for a multi-billion-dollar arrangement with China. Well, the paper suggests the internal U.S. disagreements damage plans for a further deal, but in the end, both sides decided to hold off from imposing tariffs on each other. Let's now turn the page and take a look at the China Daily. In contrast, the Wall Street Journal, it quotes saying that Washington and Beijing have agreed on the outline of a deal to lift a ban on Chinese telecommunications company ZTE. It's another of those key trade issues that have caused tensions between Beijing and Washington. President Trump had promised to review the policy barring U.S. companies from trading with ZTE. And finally, you have the front page of the international edition of the Japan Times, and it fears that tough new European privacy laws being introduced on Friday could lead to a surge in cybercrime, spam, and fraud. The controversies over the so-called Internet Address Directory, which will largely become private under these new regulations. And those are the papers. Now, Ben, which story is trending online?
Well, Rico, you know what it's like when you apply for a job, you try and make your qualifications and your credentials sound as strong as possible, but don't ever take it too far. And here's a cautionary tale. The law professor nominated to be Italy's next prime minister is facing allegations that he embellished his CV. Giuseppe Conti says on his resume that he perfected his legal studies at New York University. But a spokeswoman for the institution claims there was no record of him having studied there. The anti-establishment five-star movement, the Anti-Immigrant League, are awaiting approval from Italy's president now to form a coalition government.
In India, 32 million households still don't have access to electricity, even though the Prime Minister claimed last month that every village had been connected to the grid. Our correspondent Dan Johnson reports from Gujarat in the west of India.
Across these dusty, sun-baked plains, this is one of India's cut-off communities. The people of Jumri have only the power they generate themselves. This is the Prime Minister's social media post where he described a historic day for India. He said that every village across the country now had access to electricity. But look at this. Looks like a village, feels like a village, and yet these people are not connected to the grid. And that's because it depends on your definition of a village. And according to the official statistics, this doesn't qualify. So when the sun goes down, life here is thrown into a long, dark shadow. These families cook, eat, live by firelight.
It's just so hot. We don't have fans, so if my children get sick, I have to fan them myself. We are also humans. We also want to live.
And they fear these children are being denied the chance of a brighter future.
The kids cannot study or progress in life. They're growing up like animals that live in the darkness of the forest.
The journey to sell their milk is long and tough. And without power, making money is even harder.
If we had electricity, we could store some milk in a fridge. Would mean we only had to drive to the city once a day instead of twice.
Look, here they've got power lines we've driven for maybe 10 minutes to the next village, and here they're already on the electricity grid. But even in villages classed as connected, power may only reach public buildings and 10% of homes, and supplies can be unreliable. After a 90-minute drive, this is where Jumri's milk is sold. When electricity is on offer, they can't afford to miss the chance. Across India, the electricity lines are reaching further, and the government says it will bring power to all the people by the end of this year. But there are millions waiting to be connected in places like this, and it's a huge challenge. Dan Johnson, BBC News in Gujarat.
Now, it's only 3 days since their wedding, but on Tuesday, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, or Prince Harry and Meghan as we know them, had their first public engagement as a married couple. They were at a Buckingham Palace garden party hosted by the Prince of Wales with guests from the charities he supports. Nicholas Witchell was there.
She's formally part of the family now, 3 days into married life, and Meghan was at Buckingham Palace for a very early 70th birthday celebration for her father-in-law and his charity work, led by Harry, but nearly ruined by a passing bumblebee.
Disable input, sorry, that bee really got me.
And then it was time to practice the art of being royal, the small talk that will be such a feature of Meghan's working life. It's all about putting people at their ease, engaging, preferably with sincerity, listening and moving on. Not unfamiliar territory for an actress. Unsurprisingly, the reviews were good.
Very personable, very warm, very
just
nice.
Down to earth.
Yes.
They're really friendly as a couple, and it's really lovely. We said congratulations, and then they said thank you, and they look really happy.
Talking of looking happy reminds us of the formal wedding photographs featuring Harry, Meghan and the bridesmaids and page boys. The photographer has revealed the secret of getting the children to cooperate.
The kids came onto the set. I immediately just shouted out, "Who likes Smarties?" And then everybody, hands up, smiles, even some of the adults I think put their hands up. And so that was our magic word of the day.
Back at Buckingham Palace, Harry and Meghan were leaving, so some family farewells. And then watch the courtier on the right. Yes, he bowed. That's something else the former Ms. Meghan Markle will need to get used to. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News at Buckingham Palace.
Ben, as we mentioned earlier in the news, earlier today, there has been a day of commemoration to mark a year since the attack at an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester.
Yes, the commemorations included a concert in the evening, and we will round off this edition of Newsday with some of the highlights from that event. Thank you for watching.